A man to be well fitted for the situation of Governor St. Helena, he observed, ought to be a person of great politeness and at the same time of great firmness, one who could gloss over a refusal and lessen the misery of the détenus, the prisoners, instead of eternally putting them in mind that they were considered as prisoners. Instead of such a man, they had sent out a man unknown, who has never commanded, who has neither order nor system, who knows not how to make himself obeyed, who has neither manners nor credit, who seems rather to have vegetated than lived, and that with villains. The 15th anniversary of Napoleon's birthday, breakfasted in the tent with the ladies and his suite, including Piotkovsky and the children. There was, however, no change of uniform or additional decorations. In the evening, the second class of domestics, including the English, had a grand supper and a dance afterwards, to the astonishment of the French. Not an Englishman got drunk. 16th, Sir Hudson Lowe came up and had a long conversation with General Montholon and myself, principally about the necessity of reducing the expenses of the establishment, which he observed was not conducted with a due regard to economy. Amongst other examples of what he considered wasteful expenditure, he stated to General Montholon that he had observed on looking over the account of Plantation House in Longwood that there was a much greater quantity of basket salt consumed at the latter than at the former. He desired, therefore, that in future common salt should be used as much as possible in the kitchen and at the table of the servants. One of Leslie's pneumatic machines for making ice sent up to Longwood this day. As soon as it was put up, I went and informed Napoleon and told him that the admiral was at Longwood. He asked several questions about the process, and it was evident that he was perfectly acquainted with the principles upon which air pumps are formed. He expressed great admiration for the science of chemistry, spoke of the great improvements which had latterly been made in it, and observed that he had always promoted and encouraged it to the best of his power. I then left him and proceeded to the room where the machine was, in order to commence the experiment in the presence of the admiral. In a few minutes, Napoleon, accompanied by Count Montholon, came in and accosted the admiral in a very pleasant manner, seeming gratified to see him. A cup full of water was then frozen in his presence in about 15 minutes, and he waited for upwards of half an hour to see if the same quantity of lemonade would freeze, which did not succeed. Milk was then tried, but it would not answer. Napoleon took in his hand the piece of ice produced from the water and observed to me, what a gratification that would have been in Egypt. The first ice ever seen in St. Helena was made by this machine and was viewed with no small degree of surprise by the yam stocks, some of whom could with difficulty be persuaded that the solid lump in their hands was really composed of water, and were not fully convinced until they had witnessed its liquefaction. 17th, went to Hut's Gate to visit Bertrand's servant Bernard, who was very ill. The sergeant of the guard ordered the sentry to be confined for letting me in. Went out to inquire, and was informed by the sergeant that he had orders to prevent everyone from going in except the general staff. Sir Hudson Lowe had, it appeared, given some directions yesterday himself on going out of Bertrand's, to whom he showed a letter from Lord Bathurst, stating that the expense of the establishment must be reduced to £8,000 per annum for everything. The men who brought the provisions were not allowed to enter, but were obliged to hand them over the wall. The servants from Longwood were also refused admittance. Mr. Brooks, the colonel's secretary, was also denied entrance. A letter sent by Sir Hudson Lowe to Count Montholon, making a demand of £12,000 a year for the maintenance of Napoleon and suite. 18th, the governor and admiral, accompanied by Sir Thomas Reed and Major Goriker, arrived at Longwood while Napoleon was walking in the garden with Counts Bertrand, Montholon, Las Casas, and son. His Excellency sent to ask an interview, which was granted. It took place in the garden. The three principal personages, Napoleon, Sir Hudson, and Sir Pulteney, were a little in front of the others. Captain Poppleton and myself stood at some distance from them, but sufficiently near to observe their gestures. We remarked that the conversation was principally on the part of Napoleon, who appeared at times considerably animated, frequently stopping and again hurried in his walk and accompanying his words with a good deal of action. Sir Hudson's manner also appeared hurried and greatly agitated. The Admiral was the only one who appeared to discourse with calmness. In about half an hour, we saw Sir Hudson Lowe abruptly turn about and withdraw without saluting Napoleon. The Admiral took off his hat, made his bow, and departed. Sir Hudson Lowe came up to where Poppleton and myself were standing, paced up and down in an agitated manner while his horses were coming, and said to me, "General Bonaparte has been very abusive to me. I parted with him rather abruptly and told him." "You were impolite, sir." He then mounted his horse and galloped away. The Admiral appeared troubled and pensive. It was evident that the interview had been very unpleasant. The 19th saw Napoleon in his dressing room. He was in very good humor and asked how Gourgaud was, and on being informed that I had given him some remedy, he laughed and said he would have done better to have dieted himself for some days, let him drink plenty of water, and eat nothing. Medicines, he said, were only fit for old people. He then said, "That governor came here yesterday to annoy me. He saw me walking in the garden, and in consequence, I could not refuse to see him. He wanted to enter into some details with me about reducing the expense of the establishment. He had the audacity to tell me that things were as he found them, and that he came up to justify himself, that he had come up 2 or 3 times before to do so, but that I was in a bath. I replied, 'No, sir, I was not in a bath, but I ordered one on purpose not to see you. In endeavoring to justify yourself, you make matters worse.' He said that I did not know him, that if I knew him, I would change my opinion. 'Know you, sir?' I answered. 'How can I know you? People make themselves known by their actions, by commanding in battles. You've never commanded in battle. You've never commanded any but vagabond Corsican deserters, Piedmontese, and Neapolitan brigands. I know the name of every English general who has distinguished himself, but I never heard of you, except as a scrivano to Blucher, or as a commandant of brigands. You've never commanded or been accustomed to men of honor.' He said that he had not sought for the employment. I told him that such employments were not asked for. They were given by governments to people who had dishonored themselves. He said that he only did his duty and that I ought not to blame him, as he only acted according to his orders. I replied, 'So does the hangman. He acts according to his orders, but when he puts a rope around my neck to finish me, is that a reason that I should like that hangman? Because he acts according to his orders. Besides, I do not believe that any government could be so mean as to give such orders as you caused to be executed.' I told him that if he pleased, he need not send up anything to eat, that I would go over and dine at the table of the brave officers of the 53rd, that I was sure there was not one of them who would not be happy to give a plate at the table to an old soldier, that there was not a soldier in the regiment who had not more heart than he had, that in the iniquitous bill of Parliament they had decreed that I was to be treated as a prisoner, but that he treated me worse than a condemned criminal or a galley slave, as those were permitted to receive newspapers and printed books, which he deprived me of. I said, 'You have power over my body, but none over my soul. That soul is as proud, fierce, and determined at the present moment as when it commanded Europe.' I told him that he was a Sibiro Siciliano and not an Englishman, and desired him not to let me see him again until he came with orders to dispatch me, when he would find all the doors thrown open to admit him. It is not my custom," continued he, "to abuse any person, but that man's effrontery produced bad blood in me, and I could not help expressing my sentiments when he had the impudence to tell me before the admiral that he had changed nothing, that all was the same as when he arrived. I replied, call the captain of ordnance here and ask him. I will leave it to his decision. This struck him dumb, and he was mute. He told me that he had found his situation so difficult that he had resigned. I replied that a worse man than himself could not be sent out, though the employment was not one which a gallant uomo would wish to accept. If you have an opportunity, added he, or if anyone asks you, you are at liberty to repeat what I have told you. Gave him Saracen's account of the campaign in Spain. Saracen said he was a traitor and a man without honor, truth, or probity. When I returned from Elba to Paris, he wrote an offer of his services to me, in which he proposed, if I would forgive and employ him, to betray to me all the secrets and plans of the English. It was my intention to have him tried as a traitor, as he deserved, instead of accepting his offer, but I was so much hurried that it escaped my memory. 21st, a ship arrived from England, went to town where I saw Captain Stanfield, to whom I mentioned in the course of conversation that a very unpleasant conversation had taken place between the governor and Napoleon, and that Sir Hudson Lowe had told the latter that he had given in his resignation. On my return, called at Hut's Gate, along with Captain Mounsell of the 53rd and Captain Poppleton. Madame Bertrand asked if there were any letters. Captain Mounsell said that he had seen some for them at the post office. On my arrival along with Napoleon asked me the same question, to which I replied that Captain Mounsell had informed Madame Bertrand that there were some at the post office. It was not my intention to have mentioned them until I had ascertained whether they would be sent to Longwood, as I did not wish to embroil him further with the governor, but as I was assured that he would hear it from Hut's Gate, I could not conceal my knowledge of the fact. The 22nd, Sir Hudson Lowe sent for me to Plantation House, found him walking in the path to the left of the house. He said that he had some communication to make to government, which to know the state of General Bonaparte's health and whether I had anything to say. I understand, continued he, that Bonaparte told you I had said that I have given in my resignation as governor of this island. Is it true? I replied, he told me that you had told him. Sir Hudson added, I never said any such thing, nor ever had any idea of it. He has either invented it, or perhaps mistaken my expressions. I merely said that if the government did not approve of my conduct, I would resign. I wish you therefore to explain to him that I never either said so or had any intention of doing it. He then asked me if I had heard the subject of their conversation. I replied some part of it. He wished to know what it was. I replied that I supposed he remembered it and that I did not wish to repeat what must be disagreeable to him. He observed that I had mentioned it elsewhere and that he had a right to hear it from my own lips. Although I had permission to communicate it, I was not pleased to be obliged to repeat a man's face opinions, such as those which had been expressed of him, but under the circumstances of the case, I did not think proper to refuse. I therefore repeated some parts. Sir Hudson said that although he had not commanded an army against him, yet that he had probably done him more mischief by the advice and information which he had given prior to, and during the conferences at Châtillon, some of which had not been published, and the conferences were going on at the time, then if he had commanded against him, that what he had pointed out had been acted upon afterwards and was the cause of his downfall from the throne. I should like, added he, to let him know this in order to give him some cause for his hatred. I shall probably publish an account of the matter. Sir Hudson Lowe then walked about for a short time, biting his nails, and asked me if Madame Bertrand had repeated to strangers any of the conversation which had passed between General Bonaparte and himself. I replied that I was not aware that Madame Bertrand was yet acquainted with it. She had better not, said he, lest it may render her and her husband's situation much more unpleasant than at present. He then repeated some of Napoleon's expressions in a very angry manner and said, "Did General Bonaparte tell you, sir, that I told him his language was impolite and indecent, and that I would not listen any longer to it?" I said no. "Then it showed," observed the governor, "great littleness on the part of General Bonaparte, not to tell you the whole. He had better reflect on his situation, for it is in my power to render him much more uncomfortable than he is. If he continues his abuse, I shall make him feel his situation. He is a prisoner of war, and I have a right to treat him according to his conduct. I'll build him up." He walked for a few minutes, repeating again some of the observations which he characterized as ungentlemanlike, until he had worked himself into a passion and said, "Tell General Bonaparte that he'd better take care what he does, as, if he continues his present conduct, I shall be obliged to take measures to increase the restrictions already in force." After observing that he had been the cause of the loss of the lives of millions of men, and might be again if he got loose, he concluded by saying, "I consider Ali Pasha to be much more respectable scoundrel than Bonaparte." The 23rd told Napoleon in the course of conversation that the governor had said that he had mistaken his expressions, as he had never said or intended to say that he had given in his resignation, that he had certainly expressed that if the government did not approve of his conduct, he would resign. "That is very extraordinary," said Napoleon, as he told me himself that he had resigned. At least I understood him so. "So much the worse." I then observed that in consequence of what had occurred at the last interview, it was probable that he would not seek another. "So much the better," said the emperor, "as then I shall be freed from the embarrassment of his vile face." 26. Napoleon asked me if I had seen the letter written by Count Montsalon to Sir Hudson Lowe, containing a list of the grievances. I replied that I had. "Do you think," said he, "that this governor will send it to England?" I assured him that there was not a doubt of it. Then, moreover, the governor told me that he had offered to him not only to send their letters home, but even to get them published in the newspapers. "It is a falsehood," replied the emperor. "He said that he would send letters to Europe and have them published, with this proviso, however, that he approved of their contents. Besides, if he wished to do so, his government would not permit it. Suppose, for example, that I sent him an address to the French nation. I do not think," continued he, "that they will allow a letter which covers them with so much disgrace to be published. The people of England want to know why I call myself emperor after having abdicated. I have explained it in that letter. It was my intention to have lived in England as a private person incognito. But as they have sent me here and want to make it appear that I was never chief magistrate or emperor of France, I still retain the title. Blank told me that he heard Lords Liverpool and Castlereagh say that one of the principal reasons why they sent me here was a dread of my caballing with the opposition. It is likely enough that they were afraid of my telling the truth of them, and of my explaining some things which they would not like, as they knew that if I remained in England, they must permit people of rank to see me. He afterwards complained of the unnecessary severity exercised in depriving him of a series of newspapers and restricting him to some unconnected numbers of the Bourbon paper, The Times. Within a few days, some more pickets have been established and several additional sentinels placed, some in sight of Napoleon, if he chose to walk after sunset. Ditches of 8 or 10 feet deep, nearly completed round the garden. 27th. Napoleon asked me if the French commissioner and Madame Sturmer had not had a quarrel. I replied that Montchenu had said that Madame Sturmer did not know how to come into a drawing room. He laughed at this and said, I will venture to say that the old booby says so because she is not sprung from one of those imbeciles, the old noblesse, because her father's a plebeian, these old emigrants hate and are jealous of all who are not hereditary asses like themselves. I asked him if the King of Prussia was a man of talent. Who, said he, King of Prussia? He burst into a fit of laughter. He, a man of talent? Greatest blockhead on earth? Blockhead who's neither talent nor information, a Don Quixote in appearance. I know him well. He cannot hold a conversation for 5 minutes. Not so his wife. She was a very clever, fine woman, but very unfortunate. She was beautiful, full of grace and intelligence. He then conversed for a considerable time about the Bourbons. They want, said he, to introduce the old system of nobility into the army. Instead of allowing the sons of peasants and laborers to be eligible to be made generals, as they were in my time, they want to confine it entirely to the old nobility, to emigres, like that old blockhead Munchenu. When you have seen Munchenu, you have seen all the old nobility in France before the Revolution, such were all the race. And such they have returned ignorant, vain, and arrogant as they left it. They have learned nothing. They have forgotten nothing. They were the cause of the revolution and so much bloodshed. And now, after 25 years of exile and disgrace, they return loaded with the same vices and crimes for which they were expatriated to produce another revolution. I know the French. Believe me, that after 6 or 10 years, the whole race will be massacred and thrown into the sun. They are cursed to the nation. It is of such as them that the Bourbons want to make generals. I made most of mine, of clay. Wherever I found talent and courage, I rewarded it. My principle was career open to talents, without asking whether there were any quarters of nobility to show. It is true that I sometimes promoted a few of the old nobility from a principle of policy and justice, but I never reposed great confidence in them. The mass of the people, continued he, now see the revival of the feudal times. They see that soon it will be impossible for their progeny to rise in the army. Every true Frenchman reflects with anguish that a family for so many years odious to France has been forced upon them over a bridge of foreign bayonets. What I am going to recount will give you some idea of the imbecility of this family. When the Count d'Artois came to Lyon, although he threw himself on his knees before the troops in order to induce them to advance against me, he never put on the cordon of the Legion of Honor, though he knew that the sight of it would be most likely to excite the minds of the soldiers in his favor, as it was the order so many of them bore on their breasts, and required nothing but bravery to obtain it. But now he decked himself out with the order of the Holy Ghost, to be eligible for which you must prove 150 years nobility, an order formed purposely to exclude merit, and one which excited indignation in the breasts of the old soldiers. We will not, said they, fight for orders like that, nor for emigres like those. He had 10 or 11 of these imbeciles as aides-de-camp, instead of showing to the troops some of those generals who had so often led them to glory. He brought with them a set of miserables who served no other purpose than to recall to the minds of the veterans their former sufferings under the noblesse and the priests. To give you an instance of the general feeling in France towards the Bourbons, I will relate to you an anecdote. On my return from Italy, while my carriage was ascending the steep hill of Tarare, I got out and walked up without any attendants, as was often my custom. My wife and my suite were at a little distance behind me. I saw an old woman, lame and hobbling about with the help of crutch, endeavoring to ascend the mountain. I had a great coat on and was not recognized. I went up to her and said, "Well, my good lady, where are you going with a haste, with so little? That belongs to your years. What is the matter?" "My faith," replied the old lady, "they tell me the emperor is here, and I want to see him before I die." "Bah," said I, "what do you want to see him for? What have you gained by him? He is a tyrant as well as the others. You've only changed one tyrant for another, Louis for Napoleon." "But, sir, that may be, but after all, he is the king of the people, and the Bourbons were the kings of the nobles. We have chosen him, and if we are to have a tyrant, let him be one chosen by ourselves." "There," said he, "you have the sentiments of the French nation expressed by an old woman."